Okay, I wanted to start by explaining what tariffs are because I'm not going to assume that people actually understand that. Tariffs are a tax on imports. So when imported goods arrive in Australia, they first have to pass through customs. And if there's a tariff that is payable on those goods, a tax payable on them because they're imports, the importer has to pay it. Tariffs can be imposed on specific goods, on goods from specific countries, or on everything. Their first effect is to increase revenue for the government. This is actually one of the reasons Trump has given for loving tariffs. He wants to use the money from tariffs to cut taxes on corporations and rich people, just as he did in his first term. But the second effect of tariffs is to make imports more expensive. So when it comes to consumer goods, that means higher prices for workers. In other words, workers pay more tax so that rich people can pay less. This is from the low taxing Trump. Actually, this is the same as the Liberals, the same reason the Liberals had for introducing the GST in 2000. It has exactly the same economic effect and logic. And the arguments against it were the same as the arguments against tariffs. But Trump isn't the only person who loves tariffs. They are massively popular on the left, and especially in the trade union movement. Trade union leaders argue that tariffs and other import controls are essential to protecting jobs. Without tariffs, they say, local manufacturers are competing with lower-priced imports, sometimes from countries with lower wages. When tariffs in Australia were largely abolished under the Fraser government and then the Hawke Labor government, manufacturing was hammered. And the number of manufacturing jobs went down by 2/3. By raising the price of imports, tariffs make it easier for local products to compete with them. The nationalist left argues that this is how tariffs help preserve well-paid union jobs. It's their phrase. It's mostly not true. Bosses don't want tariffs to protect jobs or wages. Even when they got tariffs, they took every opportunity to install labour-saving equipment, which didn't save jobs, and resist pay rises. So what was the experience of high tariffs in Australia in the 1950s and 60s? One of the main industries that was protected was clothing, and tariffs were enormous. Workers who were mainly migrant women got terrible wages and worked in the most appalling conditions and frequently subject to sexual harassment in slum factories, the kind of old buildings you see through Brunswick, North Fitzroy, and even in the city. The rest of us in the working class paid 2 to 3 times as much as the global price for our clothes. So whenever there was talk about reducing tariffs on clothes or not increasing them, the bosses would bust the workers into town to protest, and the gutless union officials would support the bosses' campaign. Another industry that was protected was cars. Again, wages were low compared to, say, the United States. The first time I went to America in 1975, car workers were earning way more than teachers in Australia. In Australia, of course, it was the other way around. The tariffs meant that the price of cars in Australia was way higher than, say, in the US, and this was paid by workers and by businesses too. From the point of view of the ruling class, using tariffs to develop the car industry in the years after the Second World War was expensive but important. Multinational corporations brought the latest technology and production systems, and this promoted a whole ecosystem of modern manufacturing in Australia. But again, it was based on the intense exploitation of largely migrant workers, and racism was used to divide them. So much for protecting good jobs. So at the same time as the Australian ruling class was imposing tariffs, the American ruling class ran a free trade policy. So why the difference? American industries were mostly the most advanced and efficient. Despite having the highest wages, their exports were competitive with other countries. The US government also welcomed imports that were cheaper than American-produced goods because they helped keep money wages lower. So free trade policies also helped the US put pressure on other countries to cut tariffs so American businesses could export more. So what does all this tell us? Tariffs are a weapon in the ruthless competition between capitalists and their governments. That's why every successful capitalist economy has used tariffs as part of the early process of economic development. Britain did it in the 18th century, the US in the 19th, Germany, Australia, Canada, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and more recently China all used tariffs for their early industrialisation. But once their industries or selected industries were globally competitive, the costs of industry protection held them back and limited export opportunities, so they became champions of free trade. So there's no real ideology here, it's just what works for capitalist accumulation. So not surprisingly, Marx and Engels were strident critics of both free trade and protection. Tariffs, they argued, were an economic weapon of the state. Quote, "The system of protective tariffs places in the hands of capital of one country the weapons to enable it to defy the capital of other countries." Free trade was no better. It represented the freedom of capital to, quote, "crush the worker." So, for instance, when the dictator Pinochet took power in Chile in 1973, he scrapped most of the tariffs and privatised government businesses. He wanted, amongst other things, import competition to keep disciplining Chile's previously militant working class. The result was immediate economic collapse, literally collapse, and deindustrialisation that took years to begin to overcome. Marx and Engels also drew out the reactionary nationalist politics of protectionism, which tells workers, quote, "It is better to be exploited by one's fellow countrymen than by foreigners," as distinct from challenging exploitation. So protectionism works to tie the unions to the bosses at the expense of workers. So when the Australian car industry was failing in the early 2000s, the unions persuaded workers at Holden and Toyota to give up wage rises, accept worse conditions in order to keep manufacturing in Australia. It did no good. Shortly after, the companies all shut up and closed down. And worst of all, it meant that there was no fight at all to actually save jobs. That would have meant fighting the bosses, not treating them as partners. So now I want to turn to look at Trump's agenda. There's a lot of rhetoric out there about Trump being unhinged, you know, the mad king, take your pick. I think this kind of talk is quite unhelpful. It's fun, but it's unhelpful, because it hides the fact that Trump's policy is actually the policy of a key section of the American ruling class. It was written by the leading right-wing think tank in the United States, the Heritage Foundation, which gets $100 million in donations from business every year to employ 700 people to pump out right-wing rubbish. Focusing on Trump's personality diverts our attention away from the real problems the American ruling class is trying to solve. So I want to kind of give some background to those problems. From the end of the Second World War to the 1970s, the US dominated economically and militarily. But as Japan and Europe rebuilt after the war, their manufacturing industries were able to challenge America's, and Americans' economic domination started to decline. As profit rates fell in the 1970s, as they always do during capitalist booms, there was a major economic crisis and the first mass unemployment since the 1930s. That intensified challenges to America's economic dominance. So America's corporations responded by demanding greater access to global markets. They demanded an end to tariffs and trade restrictions on their exports, on their rights to invest, protection for their investments, protection of their intellectual property. They wanted privatisation globally so that their corporations didn't have to compete with state-owned businesses that were protected from the full force of market competition. And they wanted privatisation so their corporations could run transport, water supplies, hospitals, universities in other countries the way they did in the United States itself. And they called this agenda globalisation. Most rich country governments supported globalisation in the hope it would cut costs and generate markets for their big businesses. But while America designed globalisation, China won it. The great, great irony. China used the right to to export to the United States to become the world's most competitive economy and the world's greatest manufacturing power. This gave it the resources to become a major military power and a potential global rival to the US, which is where we are today. Now, alongside its declining economic dominance, America also suffered a catastrophic and wonderful defeat in Vietnam in 1975 and humiliation from the Iranian Revolution of 1979. It responded with military aggression. They first ratcheted up the Cold War against the Soviet Union, which they won. They invaded Iraq in 1991 and 2003 and Afghanistan in 2002 to show the power of their military and reassert control over Middle Eastern oil. Their aim was to tell the rest of the world's wealthy powers and poor powers that they needed American military power to crush rogue states and keep order in the world. The problem was that these invasions did not produce global order, but disorder. American military spending has made it the world's most indebted nation. The United States government alone owes 36 trillion American dollars, 58 trillion Australian dollars, like just eye-watering, unimaginable amounts of money. And those debts also threaten global stability. And of course now we have the genocide in Gaza, funded, armed and assisted by the US and of course Australia as well. So this is America today. Still the richest and most powerful state in the world, but one whose economic strength is declining, challenged by China, whose military has only got the power to destroy, not to stabilise or rule. It's a society divided by massive inequality, poisoned by an opiate epidemic, falling life expectancy. I mean, Chinese life expectancy has gone past America's. Whose own people don't trust its government or its corporations. A society wrecked by violence, torn apart by racism and misogyny, whose rulers show contempt for science. I mean, it's just a completely dystopian product of American ruling class rule. And what Trump represents is a reckless, dangerous attempt to break out of this cycle of decline. So Trump's agenda is to smash up the pitiful remains of the so-called global rules-based order. The US has never accepted the right of the United Nations or global institutions to challenge its actions. Now he's launched a new attack on UN institutions, cutting funding to the World Health Organization and various other UN bodies. In Trump's first term, the US set out to cripple the World Trade Organization. This is a body the US helped set up, partly controls, and which enforced the treaties that governed globalisation. So they set this thing up to help their corporations. Now he's first set out to cripple it, and now he wants to destroy it. Trump's broad agenda is to shift from a system that's called multilateralism to a system that's known as bilateralism. So in other words, from partnerships in which it's the strongest of many states and sets a lot of the rules, to a series of trade and military agreements with individual nation states. On their own, all those individual states are much, much weaker than the US. Trump hopes that dealing with them one-to-one will make it easier to impose American interests on them. So that's one aspect of his plan to impose tariffs all over the place. The other agenda, Trump's other reason for focusing on tariffs is to rebuild American manufacturing. Manufacturing lies at the heart of both economic and military power. He wants to ensure that all manufacturing necessary for weapons is done within the US. And this will be building on Joe Biden's agenda, which was to encourage and pressure manufacturers to produce advanced microchips in the US and deny them to China. But the one thing that Trump's tariffs will not do is bring back manufacturing investment to America and manufacturing jobs for workers in America. They didn't last time. So Trump's already tried this. Last time he imposed tariffs, manufacturing production actually declined, as did manufacturing jobs. Tariffs on imported steel and aluminium will simply raise the price of those goods in America, and those increased costs will flow through to everything made from steel or aluminium. That will make American products more expensive and harder to export. That's one of the reasons that the Ford Motor Company chief has just come out and attacked the policy. But perhaps the main reason Trump's tariffs won't work is that they ignore the way globalisation has changed the production of physical goods in the world. We really do have global production today. So just one interesting statistic. Something like 40 to 50% of the global trade in physical goods is trade in what's called intermediate goods. So they're not the things that you buy or any business buys. All right? They're the things that cross national boundaries to be further processed, further developed, or assembled into the final product. So 40 to 50% of trade in goods is trade in these is partly made goods, if you want to think of it that way. So take the iPhone. So an iPhone has around 180 components. They are assembled in high-tech, every single one of those is assembled in high-tech factories in over 40 countries before being assembled, mostly in China. The biggest assembly plant in China has 300,000 workers at Zhangzhou. Does anyone in their right mind think that these iPhone suppliers are going to uproot their sophisticated manufacturing facilities and spend billions to move them to the United States, train American workers and managers just because Trump wants to impose tariffs? And if they did this, they would spend all this money and effort for not a single dollar extra profit. Another example. There's been a massive integration of car manufacturing plants between the American city of Detroit, Motor City, and the Canadian city of Windsor, which is literally on the other side of the Detroit River. Like literally, you see one from the other across the river. So the components of an average car made in one of these places crosses that international boundary 6 to 8 times. You know, one process is done in Canada, it's moved to the US, something else is done, moves back to Canada, and so on and so forth. Now, Trump has threatened a 25% tariff on all goods from Canada and Mexico. That would cripple Windsor, Detroit car production. But it won't make the car companies move their Canadian car plants back to the US. The Ford CEO said it would cost $50 billion to do that. They're just not going to do it. Here in Australia, we have to start to see that our government is massively implicated in Trump's agenda. After Trump's inauguration, our Defence Minister, Richard Marles, rushed off to Washington to assure the administration that Australia supported, quote, American leadership in the world in terms of supporting the global rules-based order. That's code for war against China. The relation that Anthony Albanese wants with Trump, special treatment because we are a key part of the American military machine, is exactly the kind of relationship Trump wants. It doesn't mean supporting the global rules-based order. Because when Trump threatened to invade Panama and seize the canal in defiance of global rules, Albanese was silent. When Trump declared he wanted to grab Greenland from Denmark, there were protests in Denmark, Albanese was silent. When Trump announced the tariffs on Canada and Mexico in defiance of a free trade agreement, Albanese was silent. And when Elon Musk interfered in the German election by funding and supporting the fascist Alternative for Germany, Albanese was silent. So the best way for us to fight Donald Trump's dangerous agenda is to fight Australian militarism and its role in strengthening American imperialism. That means that things that we do, campaign against AUKUS, against war with China, against US bases, against using Pine Gap to wage war in Palestine. And the massive campaign to stop the Zionist genocide is inherently a campaign against Trump. We also need to see that a major part of the Australian ruling class doesn't just back American imperialism, but they back Trump. Look who was at the inauguration. Gina Rinehart, Australian mining billionaire. Anthony Pratt, Australian manufacturing billionaire. James Packer, Australian media and casino billionaire. So every blow we land against our bosses is inherently a blow against Trump and his agenda. But there's one measure I think we need to reject in terms of responding to Trump. If Trump does go ahead with tariffs on Australian exports of steel and aluminium, we should oppose the imposition of retaliatory tariffs on ordinary American imports. Right, I'm sure the left will call for them. We should oppose them. They would just be for show. And no matter how angry some politicians pretend to be, it would not in any way reflect any break between the Australian government and American imperialism. They would just be an attempt to channel hostility to Trump into reactionary Australian nationalism. Instead, we have to say American workers are our friends and our comrades, as are the workers of China and every other country. There are already protests against Trump. A recent poll showed that 2/3 of people thought he wasn't doing enough to deal with the rising cost of living. Their struggle against low wages and rotten healthcare and racism is our fight too. In all of this, the only progressive way forward is for workers of the world to unite.